The nurse was still adjusting my IV when my brother leaned against the hospital wall, smiling like he'd just won something. "I had to make an executive decision," Caleb said casually, flipping a manila folder open in front of me. "Estate papers. Our parents' estate. My name was nowhere on them." My stomach dropped as he added, almost kindly, "You were unconscious. Someone had to step up." The heart monitor spiked as he walked out, already dialing his lawyer. That was the moment everything inside me went cold. Before I tell you what happened next, hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted. You're going to want to see how this ends. I woke up to white ceiling tiles and the smell of antiseptic burning my nostrils. My chest felt like someone had cracked it open and forgotten to put it back together properly. Emergency surgery, the doctors had said. Complications from what should have been routine. I'd been under for hours, then sedated for days. Time had become this liquid thing, slipping through my fingers every time I tried to hold onto it. The nurse was checking my vitals when Caleb walked in. He wasn't carrying flowers or a card. He was carrying a folder. The thick manila kind that lawyers use when they want you to know something is serious. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He didn't sit down. He just stood there at the foot of my bed, and his smile was wrong. Too satisfied. Too final. "Jen," he said, using the nickname he'd barely used since high school. "We need to talk about the estate." My throat was dry. The painkillers made everything feel distant, like I was watching this happen to someone else. I tried to sit up, but my body wasn't cooperating. The tubes and wires kept me tethered to machines that beeped and whirred with every shallow breath I took. "What about it?" My voice came out scratched and weak. He opened the folder. Pages rustled with a sound that felt too loud in that quiet room. "I had to make an executive decision while you were out. Someone needed to take control, handle things properly." I stared at the papers he was holding, but the words wouldn't focus. Everything was swimming. He flipped through pages covered in legal text, signatures, and official stamps. I caught glimpses of addresses I recognized. Properties Mom and Dad had built their lives around. The house we grew up in. The rental properties downtown. The family business I'd spent 5 years helping modernize, pouring my weekends and late nights into spreadsheets and client meetings. "What decision?" I managed to ask. Caleb's smile got tighter, more controlled. "I transferred everything into my name, full control. It's cleaner this way, more efficient. You were unconscious, Jen. Someone had to step up and make the tough calls." The heart monitor started beeping faster. I could hear it, that escalating rhythm matching the panic rising in my chest. He noticed it too, glanced at the machine, then back at me with something that looked almost like concern. But it wasn't a concern. It was satisfying. "My name," I whispered. "Where's my name?" He closed the folder with a soft thump. "You were listed as incapacitated, legally, temporarily incompetent to make decisions. So I activated the emergency clause. Everything's in order." My lawyer made sure of it. "Our parents wanted us to share everything equally." The words felt childish coming out of my mouth. Naive. Like I was appealing to some memory of fairness that had died the moment he walked into this hospital room. "They wanted the estate protected," he corrected. "And you're too emotional to handle this right now. Look at you." After he left, the nausea hit, not from the surgery, from betrayal. It rolled through me in waves, each one stronger than the last. The nurse came back in, alarmed by the monitors, asking if I needed something for the pain. I shook my head. Pain medication wouldn't fix this. Nothing in her cart of supplies could touch what was happening inside my chest. My hands were shaking. I pressed them against the thin hospital blanket, trying to steady myself, but the tremors wouldn't stop. This wasn't just a shock. This was my body understanding what my mind was still trying to reject. Caleb had waited. He'd waited until I was at my most vulnerable, sedated, and helpless, and he'd taken everything. The machines around me seemed louder now. The beeping, the whirring, the soft hiss of oxygen. They were the only witnesses to this moment. The only things that had recorded what he'd just done. And they didn't care. They just kept measuring my heartbeat, my breathing, my blood pressure. Clinical, detached, accurate. I closed my eyes and tried to remember what the lawyer had said when Mom and Dad set up the estate. Equal distribution, Equal decision-making power. Those were the words they'd used. Both of us together, not one or the other. Both. But legal documents were just paper, I was learning. Paper that could be moved and changed and signed while you were unconscious. The sound of betrayal, I realized, was louder than any machine in this room. My name is Genevieve Vaughn. I'm 32 years old. Before this hospital bed, before emergency surgery, before my brother decided I was disposable, I was the person who fixed things. Not in a mechanical way, but in the quiet, persistent way that actually matters. I was the one who sat with Mom during her chemo appointments, who held Dad's hand when the dementia started erasing him piece by piece, who took over the family business books when neither of them could focus anymore. Caleb had been busy during those years, busy with his law firm, busy with his new wife and her expensive tastes, busy building a life that looked impressive from the outside but required constant cash flow to maintain. He showed up for the holidays, for the funerals, for the reading of the will, but the daily work, the thankless, grinding hours of keeping everything running, that had been mine. I'd modernized the property management system, digitized records that had been kept in filing cabinets since the 1980s, built relationships with tenants and contractors. I'd turned a struggling family business into something stable, something that generated consistent income, not because I wanted recognition, but because it needed to be done, because our parents had worked too hard to let it crumble. And now, lying in this hospital bed, tubes in my arms and pain radiating through my chest, I understood something clearly. Caleb hadn't taken the estate in spite of my work. He'd taken it because of my work. I'd made it valuable enough to steal. The memory hit me hard that first night alone. Mom and Dad sitting at the kitchen table 3 years ago. Back when Dad could still remember our names most days. They'd called both of us over for dinner and said they needed to discuss something important. Estate planning. Their legacy. How they wanted things handled after they were gone. "This stays equal," Dad had said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "Both of you, together, that's how this family works." Mom nodded, squeezing his hand. "You take care of each other. You protect what we built. No one person carries this alone." Caleb had agreed easily, smiled, said all the right things about responsibility and honor and family. I'd believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my brother. We'd grown up in the same house, shared the same parents, carried the same last name. Blood was supposed to mean something. But lying here in this hospital bed, replaying that conversation, I realized I'd been watching a performance. Caleb had said what needed to be said to keep things smooth, to avoid conflict, to maintain the appearance of unity until the moment he could make his move. Equal, Dad had said. That word echoed in my head now, bitter and hollow. Equal meant nothing when one person was unconscious and the other was signing papers. I pressed the call button. I asked the nurse for my phone, started making a list of questions that needed answers. They released me 4 days later. I went home to an apartment that felt too quiet and sat at my kitchen table with the copies Caleb had left. He'd been generous enough to provide documentation. Probably thought it would make him look transparent, legitimate, like someone who had nothing to hide. I called him that first morning back, used the calmest voice I could manage, asked if we could meet, talk things through. He agreed immediately, suggested his office. Of course he did. Home field advantage. His office was downtown, all glass and steel and expensive furniture that screamed success. The receptionist recognized me, smiled politely, and offered water. I declined. Caleb kept me waiting 20 minutes. Power play. When he finally appeared, his handshake was firm, professional, like I was a client, not his sister. "I'm glad you're recovering," he said, settling behind his desk. "You look better." "I want copies of everything," I said. No preamble, no small talk. "Every document, every filing, every piece of paper you signed while I was in that hospital." His smile didn't waver. "Of course, transparency is important, but Jen, you need to understand this was all done properly. My lawyer triple-checked everything. There's no mistake here." "Then you won't mind me having my own lawyer look at it." Something flickered across his face, just for a second. Then it was gone, replaced by that smooth professional mask. By all means, but lawyers are expensive, and honestly, you're still recovering. Why put yourself through unnecessary stress? I didn't sleep that first week at home. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Caleb standing at the foot of my hospital bed, that folder in his hands, that smile on his face. The painkillers sat untouched on my nightstand. I needed to clear my head. I needed to think through every detail without the fog of medication dulling my edges. I spread the documents across my dining room table. Pages and pages of legal text, transfer of authority, assignment of assets, power of attorney activated under medical incapacitation. The language was dense, deliberately confusing, designed to make regular people feel stupid for not understanding. But I wasn't stupid. I was angry, and anger, I was discovering, had a way of sharpening focus. I read everything 3 times, made notes, highlighted sections that felt wrong even if I couldn't articulate why yet. The timestamps bothered me, the dates of filing, the signatures. Something about the sequence felt rushed, sloppy, like someone had been working fast, trying to get everything locked down before a window closed. By sunrise, my coffee had gone cold. My back ached from hunching over paperwork, but I found it. A small detail buried in the medical authorization section. The clause Caleb had activated required me to be legally incapacitated and unable to make competent decisions for a period exceeding 72 hours. I checked my hospital discharge summary. The timeline. I'd been sedated, yes, but I'd been conscious and responsive within 48 hours of surgery. The doctors had noted it. I recorded it, documented my cognition returning. Caleb had filed the papers at hour 60, before the required window had closed, before he legally could. The timing discrepancy was small, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. The kind of detail that gets buried in hundreds of pages of legal documentation. But it was there, precise, undeniable. Caleb had activated emergency authority 12 hours before he legally had the right to do so. I sat back in my chair, staring at the page. This wasn't just aggressive. This was fraudulent. He'd rushed the filing, gambling that no one would check the medical records closely enough to notice the gap. That I'd be too overwhelmed, too hurt, too defeated to fight back. The clause he'd used was designed for extreme situations. Comas, persistent vegetative states, not someone recovering from surgery with a clear prognosis. The authorization was supposed to be temporary, activated only when necessary, reviewed regularly. But Caleb had filed it as permanent, as a complete transfer of control with no end date, no review process, no safeguards. I made another pot of coffee. I opened my laptop, started searching for attorneys who specialized in estate law and fraud. The list was longer than I expected. I filtered by reviews, by success rates, by cases similar to mine, made a short list, started making calls. Most offices were closed. It was Sunday, but I left messages. Calm, clear messages explaining the situation in broad strokes, asking for consultations. I didn't mention the timeline discrepancy yet. That was ammunition. You don't show your ammunition in a voicemail. By Monday morning, 3 attorneys had called back. I scheduled appointments for that week, all of them. I wanted options. I wanted to hear how different legal minds approached this, because Caleb had his lawyer. Now I need mine. Walking into the family business felt different. The building looked the same. Same brick exterior, same worn steps, same door that stuck in humid weather. But inside, everything had shifted. The staff who'd worked with me for years couldn't quite meet my eyes. They knew. Of course they knew. Caleb had made sure everyone knew who was in charge now. Sarah from accounting gave me a pity smile. "Jen, good to see you up and around." "Thanks, I'm looking for the quarterly reports." "Oh," she hesitated. "Caleb asked us to send all financial documents to his office now. New protocol." "New protocol." I repeated the words flatly. She shifted uncomfortably. "He said it was about streamlining communication, avoiding confusion during the transition." The transition, like I'd retired, like I'd stepped down voluntarily instead of being erased while unconscious. I nodded slowly. Didn't argue. Arguing with Sarah wouldn't help. She was following orders, protecting her job. I understood that. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. I checked my old office. Someone had already boxed my personal items. Photos, coffee mug, the small plant I'd kept alive for 3 years, everything stacked neatly by the door, ready for removal. Efficient. Clean, like I'd never been there. Marcus from maintenance found me standing there. "This is wrong," he said quietly. "What he did, everyone knows it." "Knowing and doing something about it are different things," I said. "Yeah," he looked at the boxes. "If you need anything, Jen, I mean it." I thanked him, carried my boxes to the car. The pity in people's eyes stung more than the betrayal. Pity meant they thought I'd already lost. The lawyer's office was nothing like Caleb's. No glass walls or expensive art. Just a small suite in an older building with worn carpet and furniture that had seen better decades. But when attorney Jessica Palmer looked at me across her desk, her eyes were sharp. Focused. She listened without interrupting as I explained everything. Then I handed her the documents. I watched her read. Her expression stayed neutral through the first pages. Professional, detached. Then she reached the medical authorization section. Her pen stopped moving. She went back, read it again. Her eyebrows drew together slightly. The pause lasted maybe 10 seconds, but those 10 seconds changed everything. "When did you regain consciousness?" she asked. I told her, showed her the discharge summary. The doctor's notes document my cognitive status. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she set the papers down carefully. "Ms. Vaughn, your brother filed for permanent control while you were still within the legal window for recovery. The authorization he used requires incapacity exceeding 72 hours. You were responsive at 48. I know. He also filed this as a permanent transfer, but the clause he activated only allows temporary emergency authority, subject to review." She leaned back. "This isn't just aggressive estate planning. This is potentially actionable fraud." Potentially. We'd need to prove intent, prove he knew the timeline, prove he deliberately misrepresented your medical status. She paused. But the fact that he rushed this through 12 hours before the window closed, that he filed permanent instead of temporary, that he never submitted you for the required medical review, that's a pattern. And patterns tell stories in court. "What do we do?" Jessica Palmer smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who just found a crack in a supposedly solid wall. "We start building our case, quietly." Over the next 2 weeks, we built the paper trail. Every document Caleb had filed, every signature, every timestamp. Jessica's paralegal pulled medical records, hospital logs, nursing notes. We created a timeline so detailed you could track every hour of my hospitalization against every action Caleb had taken. The picture that emerged was damning. He'd filed the initial emergency authority at hour 60, submitted the permanent transfer at hour 62, registered the property deeds at hour 65, all of it in a compressed window, all of it before the legal requirements were met. He'd been racing against my recovery, against the moment I'd wake up clear-headed enough to stop him. But there was more. Jessica found filings for loans against the rental properties, applications for lines of credit using the business as collateral. He hadn't just taken control. He'd immediately started leveraging everything for cash. Within days of the papers being signed, he'd borrowed against our parents' legacy. "Why?" I asked Jessica. "He has his own law firm, his own income. Why does he need this?" She pulled up public records, showed me liens against his firm, debt collections. His wife's shopping habits are documented across credit card lawsuits. "Your brother is drowning," she said simply. "He needed a life raft. You handed him one by being in that hospital bed." The betrayal took on new dimensions. This wasn't about family legacy or protecting assets. This was about Caleb robbing our parents' estate to cover his own failures. And he'd used my surgery, my vulnerability, as the opportunity to do it. "What's our next move?" I asked. "We stay invisible," Jessica said. "Let him think he won. Let him get comfortable. Comfortable people make mistakes." Staying invisible was harder than I expected. Every instinct screamed at me to confront Caleb, to call him out publicly, to make sure everyone knew what he'd done. But Jessica was right. Visible targets get prepared for, invisible threats catch people off guard. So I was defeated, returned Caleb's calls with short, tired responses, let him talk about what's best for the family, listened to his plans for the properties without arguing. He took my silence as acceptance, as resignation, exactly what I needed him to believe. Meanwhile, I watched, monitored the business from a distance through connections who stayed loyal. Marcus sent me updates disguised as friendly check-ins. Sarah occasionally forwarded documents she thought I should see, always with plausible deniability. Small acts of quiet rebellion. Caleb was making changes, fast changes. He'd raised rents on 3 properties without proper notice periods, fired the maintenance company Dad had worked with for 20 years, and hired his brother-in-law's firm at twice the cost. Started taking executive draws from the business account for personal expenses. Every decision was about immediate cash flow, short-term gain, personal benefit. He was also getting bolder. Started posting on social media about business growth and smart investments. Photos of expensive dinners and new purchases. The kind of lifestyle inflation that comes from someone who suddenly has access to money they didn't earn. He wasn't just spending our parents' legacy. He was flaunting it. Jessica documented everything. Every post, every transaction, every decision that violated fiduciary responsibility. The case file was getting thick, heavy, substantial, and Caleb had no idea it existed. 2 months after the hospital, Caleb made his biggest mistake. He hosted a party at the family house. The house Mom and Dad had bought 40 years ago, the house we'd grown up in, the house that was supposed to stay in the family. He threw a party there for his law firm colleagues. I didn't attend, but I heard about it. The expensive catering, the hired bartenders, the renovations he'd rushed through to make the house look more modern. He'd ripped out Mom's garden, painted over the pencil marks on the doorframe where Dad had measured our heights every birthday, erased decades of family history for aesthetic appeal. Someone sent me photos. Caleb standing in the living room, drink raised, surrounded by people who thought he was successful. I thought he was smart. Thought he'd built all this himself. In the background, I could see where he'd hung his law degree on the wall, the same wall where Mom's watercolors used to hang. The caption on his social media post said, "Celebrating family legacy and new beginnings." I showed the photos to Jessica. She studied them carefully. "He's getting reckless," she said. "Arrogant, that's good for us." How is this good? Because arrogant people stop covering their tracks. They stop checking details. They believe they're untouchable. She zoomed in on one photo. "Look at the background. That's new furniture, new decorations. I'm guessing he charged it to the estate account." Probably. Personal expenses on estate funds, that's misappropriation, and he just documented it publicly. She smiled. Like I said, arrogance is loud. It broadcasts evidence. I looked at the photos again, at my brother standing in our parents' house like he owned it. Because legally, right now, he did. But legal and right weren't always the same thing. And that gap, that small space between what was legal and what was right, that's where we were building our case. As a co-founder of the family business, there were certain rights I still technically held. Rights that hadn't been explicitly transferred because they were tied to the original incorporation documents. One of those rights was the ability to request a routine financial audit. It was a safeguard Dad had built in decades ago, before computers, before digital accounting, when trust had to be verified on paper. Caleb had forgotten about it, or assumed it didn't matter anymore, or thought I didn't know it existed. Whatever the reason, when I filed the formal audit request through the business's registered agent, it was completely legal, completely within my rights, and completely unavoidable. The letter arrived at Caleb's office on a Tuesday. Jessica made sure it was properly formatted, properly filed, impossible to dismiss. It requested a comprehensive financial audit of the business accounts, all transactions from the past year, full documentation of expenses and revenue. Standard procedure. routine verification. Caleb called me 3 hours later. His voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. "What are you doing, Jen?" "Requesting an audit. It's my right as co-founder." "We don't need an audit. I have everything under control." "Then the audit will confirm that, unless there's something you don't want confirmed." Silence, long enough to be meaningful. Then, "This is about trust, family trust, and you're acting like I'm some criminal." "I'm acting like someone who wants financial transparency. If everything's legitimate, you have nothing to worry about." "You're wasting everyone's time, wasting estate money on unnecessary audits." "Estate money you control," I reminded him. "So really, you're wasting your own money if you fight this." He hung up, but the audit request stood, and within a week, an independent accounting firm was scheduled to review the books. Caleb couldn't stop it without raising red flags. All he could do was wait and hope his tracks were covered well enough. They weren't. The audit took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Caleb making increasingly frantic calls. 3 weeks of numbers being scrutinized, receipts being requested, transactions being traced. I stayed quiet, stayed patient, waited for the report. When it came, Jessica read it first, called me into her office with an expression that was carefully neutral but couldn't quite hide the satisfaction underneath. She handed me the report, 43 pages of findings. The numbers were damning. Rent deposits that should have gone to the business account had been rerouted to Caleb's personal account. Maintenance expenses that didn't match any actual work performed. Executive draws that violated the business operating agreement. Personal purchases charged to estate credit cards. Every suspicious transaction I'd suspected, documented and verified. But it was worse than that. The audit had uncovered decisions made without required consent, major contracts signed without board approval, properties sold without notification. Caleb had been operating as if he had absolute authority, as if the business was his personal piggy bank, as if oversight didn't exist. "This goes beyond mismanagement," Jessica said. "This is a systematic diversion of funds, breach of fiduciary duty, potentially criminal fraud." "What happens now?" "Now we take this to court. Request an emergency freeze on all estate assets pending investigation. And we filed a formal complaint with the State Bar Association about your brother's conduct." "The Bar Association?" "He's an attorney. He knows better. This isn't ignorance. This is deliberate. And attorneys who commit fraud against family members tend to lose their licenses." She closed the report. "Your brother doesn't just lose the estate, Jen, he loses everything." I should have felt triumph, victory, but all I felt was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of betrayal, tired of discovering new depths to Caleb's greed. "Let's do it," I said. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning. The business had 3 board members, me, Caleb, and our parents' longtime attorney, Harold Chen, who'd been serving as a neutral third party since Dad's death. Harold had been quiet through all of this, professional, detached, but when he saw the audit report, something shifted in his expression. Caleb walked into the conference room confident. He dressed carefully, full suit, expensive watch, leather folder. He thought this was about defending his decisions, explaining his strategy. He thought Harold would back him up. After all, Harold had helped process the estate transfer, had witnessed the documents, had filed the papers. What Caleb didn't know was that Jessica had sent Harold the medical timeline 3 days ago, had shown him the rushed filings, the timeline discrepancy, the fraudulent authorization. Harold had spent 72 hours reviewing everything, and Harold, unlike Caleb, actually valued his professional ethics. The meeting started formally, Harold at the head of the table, me on one side, Caleb on the other. The audit report in the center is like a bomb waiting to detonate. "Caleb," Harold began, his voice measured, "we need to discuss these findings." "Minor accounting discrepancies," Caleb said dismissively. "Easily explained. I've been managing a lot of moving parts. Some transactions got categorized wrong, nothing criminal." "Minor," I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken directly to Caleb in weeks. You rerouted $40,000 in rent deposits to your personal account. You charged $30,000 in personal expenses to estate cards. You signed contracts without board approval and sold property without notification. That's not miscategorization. That's theft. His face flushed. I had authority, full authority. You were incapacitated when decisions needed to be made, so I made them. Except you didn't have authority, Harold said. He opened his own folder. You activated emergency powers before the legal requirements were met. You filed a permanent transfer when only temporary was authorized. And you never submitted Genevieve for the required medical review. The color drained from Caleb's face. Harold, I don't know what she told you, but... She didn't tell me anything. Harold's voice was cold. Medical records don't lie. Hospital logs don't lie. Filing timestamps don't lie. You rushed paperwork through while your sister was recovering from surgery. You misrepresented her medical status to gain control. And then you immediately started borrowing against and spending from assets that weren't legally yours to access. Caleb looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since the hospital, saw something he hadn't expected. I wasn't crying. I wasn't begging. I wasn't emotional. I was watching him realize that he'd underestimated the quiet sister who fixed things. This is ridiculous, he tried. Jen, we're family. We can work this out. You don't need lawyers and audits and formal complaints. We can handle this internally. You handled it internally, I said. While I was in a hospital bed, now I'm handling it legally. He stood abruptly. You're going to destroy the family over accounting errors, over timing technicalities. This is what Mom and Dad would have wanted, us at each other's throats. Mom and Dad wanted us to share responsibility equally, to protect what they built together. You decided to steal it instead. I stayed seated, calm. And you documented it beautifully, every decision, every expense, every fraudulent signature. You were so confident you'd gotten away with it that you posted photos of yourself spending their money on social media. That's when Caleb made his final mistake. He sent an email, right there in the meeting, angry and defensive, typing furiously on his phone. Sent it to Harold, to me, to his own lawyer. A long, hostile message about how he'd had to take control because I was too weak to handle responsibility. How he'd done what was necessary while I was sedated. How the family needed strong leadership, not emotional reactions. He used that word, sedated, admitted in writing that he'd taken action while I was medically compromised, admitted he'd rushed, admitted it was about control, not protection. Jessica, who was monitoring everything remotely, would later call that email the smoking gun. The one piece of evidence that proved intent, proven knowledge, proven fraud. Caleb had just confessed in writing to everything we'd been building a case around. Harold looked at the email on his laptop, looked at Caleb. I'm suspending your access to all estate accounts effective immediately, and I'm recommending to the court that control be frozen pending investigation. The medical timeline became the centerpiece of the legal case. Jessica had it printed on a large board, clear and visual. Every hour of my hospitalization was marked. Every filing Caleb made noted. The overlap highlighted in red. Hour 36, surgery completed. Hour 42, patient responsive to verbal commands. Hour 48, patient fully conscious, cognitive function normal. Hour 60, Caleb files emergency authority. Hour 62, Caleb files permanent transfer. Hour 65, Caleb registers property deeds. The required window was 72 hours. Caleb had jumped the gun by 12 hours. 12 hours that seemed insignificant until you understood what they represented. Proof that he'd been monitoring my recovery, waiting for any possible moment to file, gambling that the small timing violation wouldn't be noticed. But it was noticed. And when placed next to the hospital records, next to the nursing notes documenting my cognition returning, next to the doctor's discharge summary stating I'd been competent to make decisions within 48 hours, the timeline didn't just suggest fraud. It proved it. Jessica submitted everything to the court, filed for emergency suspension of the estate transfer, requested full forensic accounting, and attached the email Caleb had sent. The email where he'd admitted taking action while I was sedated, where he'd framed it as necessary executive decision-making instead of what it actually was, opportunistic theft. The judge reviewed the filing, scheduled an emergency hearing for the following week, ordered Caleb to appear and show cause why the transfer shouldn't be immediately voided. The legal machinery was moving now, slowly but inevitably. And Caleb, who'd been so confident in his legal maneuvering, was about to discover that courts don't like attorneys who defraud their own family members. Especially when the evidence is this clear. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Tuesday morning. Courthouse downtown, same building where probate had processed our parents' estate. Caleb arrived with his lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman who looked expensive and competent. They sat on one side of the courtroom. Jessica and I sat on the other. Judge Morrison was in her 60s, with silver hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen every trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. She read through the filings silently while we waited. The only sound was pages turning and the clock on the wall ticking. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Vaughn, you activated emergency authority over your sister's estate while she was hospitalized for surgery." "Yes, Your Honor," Caleb stood. "Someone needed to make decisions. The properties required immediate attention. Tenants needed responses. The business needed leadership. According to these medical records, your sister was conscious and cognitively functional within 48 hours of surgery. The doctors said she needed recovery time. The doctors documented her as competent to make medical and legal decisions. Yet you filed for permanent control at hour 60, 12 hours before the legal threshold for incapacity was met." Caleb's lawyer tried to intervene. "Your Honor, the timing was based on the best medical information available at the time." "The best medical information," Judge Morrison interrupted, "is documented in these hospital records, which shows clearly that Ms. Vaughn was recovering as expected, not incapacitated, not incompetent, recovering." She looked at Caleb. "You filed a permanent transfer using a clause designed for temporary emergency authority. You never submitted your sister for the required medical review. And within days of gaining control, you began borrowing against and spending from estate assets for personal benefit." Caleb went pale. "I was managing." "You were spending on personal expenses, on renovations to property you'd just taken control of, on parties and purchases documented extensively on social media." She closed the file. "This isn't estate management, Mr. Vaughn. This is fraud." The word hung in the courtroom. Heavy, final, undeniable. "I'm ordering an immediate freeze on all estate assets," Judge Morrison said. "Mr. Vaughn, your access to accounts, properties, and business decisions is suspended pending full investigation. Ms. Vaughn, temporary control reverts to you, subject to court oversight, until this matter is resolved." Caleb started to speak. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, stopping him. Smart move. Anything he said now would only make things worse. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I'm referring this matter to the State Bar Association for review of potential ethical violations, and I'm ordering a complete forensic audit of all transactions since the estate transfer. If evidence of criminal conduct is found, the district attorney will be notified." Caleb's world was collapsing. I could see it in his posture, the way his shoulders slumped, the way his hands gripped the table. This wasn't just about losing the estate anymore. This was about losing his law license, his reputation, potentially his freedom. The judge set another hearing date for 6 weeks out. Time for the forensic audit to complete. Time for the Bar Association to review. Time for reality to fully sink in for my brother. We left the courtroom through different exits. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The legal system had finally seen what I'd been documenting for months. The truth had finally had its day in court. And the truth, it turned out, was damning. Jessica walked me to my car. That went better than expected. "What happens now?" "Now we wait for the forensic audit. But honestly, after that hearing, I think Caleb's lawyer is going to recommend settlement. Fighting this will only make his Bar Association problems worse." She paused. He's done, Jen, professionally. Legally, he can't recover from this. I nodded. I felt the weight of it. Not triumph, but something quieter. Justice, maybe. Or just the exhaustion of a fight finally reaching its end. The fallout happened faster than anyone expected. Within a week, Caleb's law firm put him on administrative leave. The Bar Association investigation wasn't complete yet, but the firm couldn't afford the appearance of harboring someone under investigation for fraud. Within 2 weeks, clients started withdrawing. Contracts were terminated. His reputation, built over 15 years, crumbled in days. The loans he'd taken against the estate properties went into immediate default when the freeze was implemented. Banks started foreclosure proceedings. The credit lines he'd opened were called. Every financial decision he'd made based on having access to our parents' assets suddenly became a liability he couldn't cover. His marriage suffered too. His wife, who'd enjoyed the sudden influx of money, who'd helped spend it on renovations and parties and expensive purchases, wasn't interested in staying through the scandal. I heard through mutual friends that she'd filed for separation, that she was claiming she hadn't known the money wasn't legitimately his. Maybe she hadn't. Maybe she'd asked and believed his answers, or maybe she'd chosen not to look too closely at where the sudden wealth came from. Either way, she was gone, and Caleb was alone with the consequences of what he'd done. I didn't feel satisfaction watching him fall, just a tired kind of sadness. This was my brother, the person I'd grown up with, shared a childhood with, and he destroyed everything, our relationship, his career, our parents' legacy, because he couldn't control his greed, because he'd thought I was too weak to fight back. The forensic audit confirmed everything. Systematic misappropriation of funds, breach of fiduciary duty, fraud. The report was over 100 pages. Every suspicious transaction was verified. Every violation is documented. It was comprehensive and devastating. Caleb's lawyer reached out to Jessica 6 weeks after the emergency hearing. They wanted to negotiate, wanted to discuss settlement terms, wanted to avoid further court proceedings. Jessica forwarded me the email with a single line: "He's ready to surrender." The proposed settlement was straightforward. Caleb would relinquish all claims to the estate, would sign documents affirming that the transfer had been improper, would agree to repay all funds he'd diverted for personal use. In exchange, we wouldn't pursue criminal charges, wouldn't push for jail time, would let the Bar Association handle professional discipline without additional testimony. It was a good offer, practical, the kind of offer someone makes when they know they've lost and just want to minimize damage. Jessica thought I should take it. Fighting him in court will take years, it costs money, and you'll win, but what you'll win is what you already have back, control of the estate. This way, it's over, clean, final. I sat with the offer for 2 days, read it multiple times, thought about what it meant. Caleb would walk away broke, disgraced, professionally destroyed, but not in prison. He'd lose everything except his freedom. Part of me wanted to reject it. I wanted to push for maximum consequences, wanted him to face criminal prosecution for what he'd done. But another part of me, the part that was tired of fighting, the part that just wanted to move forward, knew Jessica was right. This was the practical choice. The choice that ended things instead of prolonging them. I signed the settlement, had it notarized, sent it back through Jessica. Within a week, Caleb signed too. The estate was officially mine, properly legally mine, and Caleb was officially nothing. No brother, no family, just a name on legal documents. A cautionary tale about greed. The judge approved the settlement on a gray Wednesday morning, made it official, entered it into the record. The estate transfer was voided. All of Caleb's actions were reversed. The properties, the business, everything went back to how it should have been from the beginning. Equal distribution, equal control, except now there was only one person to distribute to. Caleb wasn't present for the final hearing. His lawyer appeared on his behalf, signed the necessary documents, and accepted the court's decision. It was anticlimactic. No dramatic confrontation, no final words, just paperwork and signatures and legal formality. Afterward, I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot, stared at the building. I tried to feel something: victory, relief, closure. but mostly I just felt empty. This had consumed 6 months of my life, 6 months of legal battles and document reviews and strategic planning, and now it is over, resolved, done. I drove to the family house, the one Caleb had renovated, had thrown parties in, had tried to erase our parents from. I walked through rooms that felt foreign now. The walls he'd painted, the furniture he'd bought, the garden he'd destroyed. It would take time to undo his changes, to bring back the feeling of home, but time was something I had now. I stood in the living room where Mom's watercolors used to hang, where Caleb had hung his law degree. The wall was bare now. He'd taken everything when the freeze was implemented, left nothing behind except empty nail holes. I'd fix it, fix all of it, not to restore what was, but to create what should be. The estate would be managed properly now, ethically, the way our parents had intended. The business would recover, the properties would be maintained, everything would be done right. But Caleb would never be part of it. That door was closed, locked, sealed permanently by his own actions. Restructuring the estate took months. I hired a proper management company for the properties, brought in an accountant to clean up the books, established real oversight and accountability. Everything Caleb should have done but hadn't because he'd been too busy stealing. Some properties I sold, the ones that required too much work or weren't profitable, used the money to pay down debt Caleb had accumulated, to settle the loans he'd taken, to restore financial stability. It was practical decision-making, unsentimental, focused on sustainability rather than preservation. The business stabilized once staff realized there was actual leadership again, once they understood decisions would be made ethically, once the chaos of Caleb's management was replaced with structure and planning. Sarah stayed, Marcus stayed, most of the core team stayed. They'd been waiting for someone to stop the bleeding. I did. I kept the family house, couldn't sell it. I didn't want to. Instead, I spent weekends there slowly undoing Caleb's renovations, replanting the garden, repainting the walls to colors Mom would have chosen, finding old photos and hanging them where they belonged. It wasn't about living in the past. It was about honoring it properly. Jessica closed her files, sent a final invoice, wrote a note saying she was proud of how I'd handled everything, that most people in my situation would have given up or gotten buried in emotion, that I'd stayed focused and strategic and won because of it. I kept the note. It meant more than the legal victory. 6 months after the settlement, I received one piece of communication from Caleb, not directly, through his lawyer. He wanted to apologize. I wanted to explain. I wanted a chance to rebuild my relationship. The lawyer said he understood if I said no, but asked that I consider it. I didn't respond. Silence was my answer. Some doors, once closed, should stay closed. A year later, I moved to a different city. Not running, just choosing a fresh start in a place without complicated history. Sold the family house to a young couple who promised to maintain the garden. Kept the business, but hired a CEO to run daily operations. Keep the profitable properties, but let professionals manage them. I built something new, not from our parents' legacy, but from my own work. Started a consulting firm helping people navigate complex estate situations. Protecting families from predators, even when those predators were family members. The work felt meaningful, important, like turning my experience into something that could help others avoid the same pain. Caleb never contacted me again after that single rejected attempt. I heard through distant connections that he'd moved out of state, was working in some unrelated field, had lost his law license permanently, was rebuilding a life that looked nothing like what he'd had before. I didn't follow up. I didn't need to know more. His life was no longer connected to mine in any way. Sometimes late at night, I thought about the hospital room, about him standing there with that folder, that smile, the moment everything changed, and I realized something important. He hadn't just stolen from me that day. He'd freed me from the obligation to maintain a relationship with someone who'd only ever seen me as a resource to exploit. People who steal power never know how to keep it. That's what I learned. They grab and take and manipulate, but power gained through betrayal is unstable. It crumbles eventually, falls apart under its own weight. Real power, the kind that lasts, comes from integrity, from doing things right even when no one's watching, from building instead of stealing. I sleep well now, better than I have in years. No machines beeping, no betrayal echoing in my mind, just quiet, just peace. Just the knowledge that I protected what mattered, held people accountable, and walked away with my integrity intact. Caleb took a lot from me, but he couldn't take that, and in the end, that's what mattered most. What would you do in this situation? If someone you trusted betrayed you when you were at your most vulnerable, would you fight back or walk away? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. We share real stories about justice, accountability, and standing up for yourself when no one else will. And don't forget to like this video. It helps us reach more people who need to hear these stories. Thanks for reading. And remember, the people who underestimate you are the ones who will be most surprised when you win.